The public loves an outlaw, often rooting for these charismatic criminals even as they weave a trail of chaos across the country. Who could forget the daring sky-high plane hijacking of the anonymous D.B. Cooper, who collected his ransom money and escaped via parachute, never to be seen again? Or the notorious Billy the Kid, who rose from being an orphaned petty crook to one of the most terrifying gunfighters in the Wild West. But those days of wild crime sprees are long gone, right? Not quite. In the early 2000s, a notorious criminal terrorized the Pacific Northwest, committing countless crimes of larceny, grand theft, and escapes from the authorities. The only thing more shocking than his seemingly endless desire to break the law was the fact that he was only a kid. The trouble started early for Colton Harris Moore when he was a boy growing up in Mount Vernon, Washington. He grew up with his parents, but his father Gordon was a drug addict and spent some time in prison before walking out on his family. Neighbors worried that Colton's mother wasn't taking good care of him, and his teachers were worried. He didn't like to listen to instructions and was constantly getting into fights. When he talked to a therapist, he said his mother was a drunk who would break his things. It wasn't long before Colton would find more serious trouble. Tired of living at home with his troubled mother, Colton was living on his own by the age of 7. He spent some of his time in the woods surrounding Mount Vernon, but there were more inviting targets, the many vacation homes near the city. He would break into them for supplies, essentially building himself a little camp in the woods. It wasn't long before the police caught up to him, and he became an unusually young convict for possession of stolen property. He'd been arrested 4 times by 13, and with a young white criminal, the authorities are usually more interested in trying to help them stay out of trouble. He got 10 days in juvenile detention, but that included meetings with therapists who said he had depression, attention deficit disorder, and intermittent explosive disorder. They hoped his stays in juvie would set him on the straight and narrow. Colton had other plans. His petty crimes took a more serious turn when he was caught possessing a neighbor's stolen camcorder. Eventually, he'd be sentenced to a longer term of 3 months in a halfway house, but that was too long for him to stay put. One day in 2008, he simply walked away and disappeared back into the wild. Colton Moore was 17 now, and he was ready to take his criminal campaign to the next level. The authorities of the Pacific Northwest were not ready to take on this precocious career criminal. Moore knew the area inside and out from his years slipping all around the woods undetected. Now that he had plans to live the outlaw life, he had no problem breaking into countless houses to get whatever he needed. Sometimes he would take a bath. Sometimes he would steal ice cream. Even outlaws need their sweet treats. Other times he'd take advantage in more expensive ways. He once stole a homeowner's credit card and snuck on their computer to order high-end night vision goggles and a can of bear mace. A good investment for someone living in the Washington woods. But his tastes were getting more and more expensive. Moore was Washington's problem alone until he wasn't. Soon, in states including Idaho, South Dakota, Nebraska, and even as far east as Illinois and Iowa, the authorities were noticing a pattern. Cars were going missing and showing up in completely different places, and everywhere those stolen cars popped up, burglaries soon followed. Authorities soon assumed that this mysterious burglar was taking cars from one place, driving them to another and abandoning them, and picking up a new car in the area to drive to parts unknown. Colton Moore had learned the criminal trade well, and this tactic made it very hard for anyone to keep tabs on him, because they never knew what he'd be driving. But his riskiest heists were still ahead of him. Moore was suspected of over 100 thefts, including some in Canada, and he stole speedboats in addition to cars. But he had a taste for dangerous games, and that led him to an obsession with aircraft. He picked up books and DVDs on how to fly small airplanes, and eventually escalated to stealing privately owned planes and using them to fly to safety. He even managed to rip off a celebrity, taking a Cessna owned by rock radio personality and novelty musician Bob Rivers. The plane was eventually found in a Yakima Indian reservation site on tribal land. But as extreme as his crimes got, Colton Harris Moore wasn't all bad. He liked stealing vehicles, making fast escapes, and taking what he needed from people's homes. But there were things he didn't do in his crime spree. He never hurt anyone. He never used a weapon to steal a car. He never ripped off anyone just for money, only stealing essentials and supplies. And he even seemed to have a soft spot for animals. A veterinary clinic about 2 hours south of Seattle was surprised one day when they found a note from Colton in 2010, saying he had some extra money and wanted to help them take care of the animals. Surprisingly, it was signed and even referred to himself by nickname, the Barefoot Bandit, which he had picked up by reportedly committing some of his heists barefoot. Colton Harris Moore was getting bold, and that would be his undoing. Colton made a critical mistake when he started stealing vehicles and driving them across state lines, and especially when he started stealing aircraft. That got the attention of the federal government, and for the first time, there was a concentrated law enforcement effort at tracking him down. In July 2010, a federal judge in Washington handed down an extensive indictment. Not only did it charge Moore with a federal crime relating to his theft of a plane from Idaho, but it put out a $10,000 bounty for information leading to his arrest. The walls were closing in on Colton's crime spree, so it was time for his most daring escape yet. The Bloomington, Indiana airport wasn't usually a hub of activity, but it became the center of a federal investigation when a Cessna 400 airplane went missing. Matching the pattern of thefts of the Barefoot Bandit, this attracted even more attention when the plane was found crashed in the waters by the Bahamas. Had the pilot survived? No one was sure at first, but they got a clue when a series of break-ins happened on Great Abaco Island. Colton had fled the country and was now continuing his crime spree in the Caribbean island nation, but not for long. It was 1 week after the plane disappeared in Indiana and authorities zeroed in on Harbor Island in the Bahamas. The local officers had been keeping track of thefts about the island, and when they found a power boat stolen from another island, they were on the trail. Things moved fast as Colton attempted to flee on a stolen boat. Police took aim and shot out the motor of his boat. Colton was stranded and surrounded, but he wasn't going easily. He threw his computer into the water, making sure his secrets would sink to the bottom of the sea, and pulled out a gun. In a tense standoff, the police managed to talk him out of shooting himself, and he was taken into custody. He had planned to flee to Cuba, which had no extradition treaty, but instead he would be headed back to the U.S. to face trial for a long list of crimes. But the drama in his case was far from over. 5 people, including 3 police officers and a security guard, split the reward money for Moore's capture, and Moore knew he was caught red-handed. After being charged for illegal entry into the Bahamas and paying a fine, he was deported to the United States. At his trial, he was sent back to Washington to face federal and local charges. After a partner of his with the unique name of Harley-Davidson Ironwing pled guilty, Moore had little chance of success at trial. He ultimately decided to plead guilty to all the counts against him and hope for leniency. Turns out, Colton Moore's good luck wasn't over quite yet. While the judge saw a 20-year-old convicted of serious crimes, she also took into consideration his troubled childhood and his statements of remorse. When she did sentence him to 7 years in prison, less than the 10 years the prosecutors wanted, she also allowed him to serve them consecutively with his state prison sentence, allowing him to be out of prison before his 20s were over. Moore vowed to make the most of his prison time, bettering himself by studying aeronautical engineering. What could go wrong with the Barefoot Bandit learning how to build his own plane? Colton's flashy crimes and young age led many people to compare him to an even more high-profile outlaw, the legendary Frank Abagnale, who started a crime spree of forgery and impersonation when he was only 15 in the 1960s. Abagnale posed as a doctor, a prison official, a lawyer, and even an airplane pilot several times before he was finally caught, even escaping from federal prison once. While his crimes eventually caught up to him, he cut a plea deal with the federal government and went to work for them, serving only 5 years in prison and beginning a lifelong career as an associate of the FBI. His story was even made into a movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. So will a similar fate await the Barefoot Bandit? Outlook so far is cloudy. Moore served less than 5 years of his 7-year sentence, being released from custody in 2016, and at only 25 years old. He went to a halfway house in Seattle and was given a job as a clerk by his defense attorney, and then had to start paying off the $129,000 in money he owes to the many people he stole from. He even made an attempt to raise money for flight school, but his parole officer put the kibosh on that, ordering the social media campaign taken down and any money raised to be sent to pay his debts. The Barefoot Bandit would have to wait longer before getting back into the air. That didn't mean his reputation wasn't still sky high. Colton Harris Moore might have been caught and sent to pay his debt to society, but he'd already become immortal. His daring thefts, unique shoeless style, and animal-friendly nature led to him gaining a huge fan base. During his crime spree, websites were started by his fans, t-shirts were printed with his face on it, and folk songs were written about him, both supporting him and by locals from the Bahamas complaining about him. They even tried to raise money to hire a bounty hunter. While Moore can't earn any money off his story due to his plea deal, a book was written about him and the rights were quickly sold to 20th Century Fox, while Colton was still on the run. In 2014, a documentary about the case premiered at a film festival and featured interviews with his mother and the FBI agents who captured him. A Canadian documentary soon followed, and he had picked up a lot of attention during his brief foray into the county. All these were done without Colton's direct involvement. But what of the man behind the crime spree? Where is he now? Colton was never one to shy away from the limelight, and even while still in prison, he briefly released a controversial blog going into his political views. And now that he's out, he stayed out of trouble with the law for the longest stretch in his life. and was looking forward to getting started on a promising career in public speaking. There was just one problem: his probation. The terms of his release meant that he had to obey strict travel restrictions until 2019. When he asked a judge to release him early, he brought dozens of letters of support, including from a famous conservative radio host and the man who owned the airplane he crashed in the Bahamas. His probation was set to expire in late 2019, and that means the Barefoot Bandit could be coming to an airport near you. For more on other notorious cases where kids get into trouble with the law, check out Weird Times Police Arrested Kids, or check this other video out instead.